Have you ever noticed that when everything finally falls quiet, something inside you panics? It's not paranoia, it's not imagination, it's real. And today, you're going to discover why your own mind sabotages the most peaceful moments of your life. There's a secret Eckhart Tolle revealed about silence, a secret that explains why so many people flee from it as if it were a mortal threat. Because for a part of you, it really is. The truth is unsettling. The ego doesn't fear silence because it's empty. The ego fears silence because it heals, and that healing happens effortlessly, without control, without the mind's involvement. Imagine for a moment you're alone. There's no music, no notifications, no voices, just silence. How long can you endure before the first distraction appears? Before you grab your phone? Before you turn on the television? Before you start talking to yourself? If you're like most people, not very long. But why? Eckhart Tolle said something that completely changed my understanding of this. He said silence is the natural language of being and the ego. The ego doesn't speak that language. When you enter true silence, something extraordinary happens. Your defenses begin to crumble, your masks begin to dissolve, and that part of you that lives creating problems simply can no longer operate. It's as if you've discovered the switch that turns off mental chaos, and the ego knows this. That's why it bombards you with urgent thoughts the moment you try to quiet down. That's why it convinces you that you're wasting time. That's why it creates imaginary emergencies that demand your immediate attention. Have you experienced this? You sit down to meditate and suddenly remember 1,000 things you need to do. You try to just breathe and your mind explodes into activity. It's not an accident, it's resistance. Silence has a power that our culture has completely forgotten. It doesn't just calm, it heals. And not through complex techniques or elaborate exercises. It heals by its very nature. When you truly allow yourself to be in silence, something within you automatically reorganizes. It's as if there's a higher intelligence operating through the stillness, an intelligence that knows exactly what you need, even when you don't. But here's the cruel paradox. We live in a time where silence has become almost impossible. Our society has created a collective aversion to quietude. We treat silence as if it were a vacuum that needs to be urgently filled. Can you imagine our ancestors sitting around a campfire, just listening to the crackling flames, just observing the stars, just being? Today, 5 minutes without external stimulation and we're already searching for entertainment. But maybe this escape isn't just about boredom. Maybe it's about fear. Fear of what we'll find in the silence. Fear of who we'll discover we are when all the distractions stop. Fear that our identity, built on constant thoughts and activities, will simply disappear. What if I told you that fear is right? Not about you disappearing, but about a part of you disappearing. The part that lives in constant agitation, the part that needs drama and problems to feel real. The part Eckhart calls the ego. In silence, the ego literally cannot survive. It's like a parasite that feeds on mental movement, and when that movement stops, it begins to starve. That's why it fights so hard. That's why it creates false urgencies. That's why it convinces you that you don't have time to be quiet, because it knows that in silence, you will discover something extraordinary. You will discover that you don't need it, that you never needed it. Remember the last time you were truly alone? Without a schedule, without goals, without anything to do or solve? For many people, this is a childhood memory, because at some point, we learned that being quiet is unproductive, that silence is a waste of time, that we always need to be doing something. But Eckhart discovered something different. he discovered that silence isn't the absence of activity, it's the presence of being, and that presence has healing properties that our rational mind can't explain. Has this ever happened to you? You're going through a difficult time, trying to solve everything mentally, and then, by chance, you find yourself in a moment of total quietude, and something calms down, something resolves itself, without you doing anything, as if silence had its own wisdom. That's exactly what happens. Silence isn't passive, it's active in a way that transcends our mental understanding. It's like a deep ocean that is always calm, even when the surface is turbulent. And when you learn to dive into that ocean, everything changes. But there's a secret that few know about how to enter this true silence, a secret that can change your relationship with quietude forever. The first thing you need to understand is that there are two kinds of silence: forced silence and allowed silence. Forced silence is when you try to stop your mind, when you fight against your thoughts, when you strive to be quiet. This kind of silence generates more tension, not less. Allowed silence is different. It's when you simply let the already present silence reveal itself. It's when you stop resisting the natural quietude that has always been there, beneath all the noise, because silence isn't something you need to create. It already exists. You just need to stop running away from it. Eckhart has a unique way of explaining this. He says silence is like the space between thoughts, and that space has always been there. You just never paid attention to it. It's like discovering that your house has a secret room you never knew existed. A room that has always been there, waiting for you to find the door. And when you find that door, when you finally allow silence to be what it is, something extraordinary happens. You discover that you don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You discover that you don't need to solve everything mentally. You discover that there is a higher intelligence operating through you, and that intelligence works best when you stop interfering. It's like discovering that you can stop rowing against the current and simply let the river carry you. But here's the most beautiful part. The more you become familiar with this silence, the more it begins to appear in your daily life. Not just when you're meditating or alone, but in the middle of conversations, in traffic, at work. Imagine having instant access to a peace, not as something you need to strive for or conquer, but as something you simply remember already exists. That's what happens when you stop running from silence and start making friends with it. But there's something Eckhart Tolle observed about our resistance to silence that's even deeper. He noticed that our culture doesn't just avoid silence, it's terrified of it. Terrified in an almost primal way. As if silence were a predator that will devour us if we let our guard down. And maybe, in a way, that's true. Maybe silence does devour something. It devours illusions. It devours unnecessary worries. It devours the dramas fabricated by the mind. And the ego lives on these things. That's why the resistance is so strong. It's not just laziness or distraction. It's a matter of survival. At least, that's how the ego sees it. But here's what the ego doesn't understand. What it thinks is death is actually birth. When you allow silence to dissolve the layers of mental agitation, you're not losing anything real. You're simply uncovering what's always been there underneath. Your true self. The self that doesn't need problems to feel alive. The self that doesn't need drama to feel important. The self that finds completeness in the simplicity of just being. And that self knows how to heal. Not through effort or complex techniques, but through the very nature of conscious presence. It's as if you discover you have an internal physician who always knew exactly what you needed. And that physician can only work when you stop making enough mental noise for him to manifest. Eckhart Tolle calls this the intelligence of being. And this intelligence doesn't operate through thoughts. It operates through presence, through awareness, through silence. But I'll tell you something that might surprise you. The resistance to silence isn't the same for everyone. It varies depending on what you most fear discovering about yourself. Some people run from silence because they fear finding emptiness. Others because they fear finding fullness, and some because they fear loneliness. Others because they fear connection with something bigger than themselves. And you? What are you afraid of finding in the silence? Because whatever it is, that's exactly what you need to find. Silence has this unique characteristic. It always offers you exactly what you need most, even when you think you need the opposite. If you're always agitated, it offers you calm. If you're always controlling, it offers you surrender. If you're always thinking, it offers you being. It's as if silence were a mirror that reflects not who you think you are, but who you really are. And maybe that's why the ego is so afraid of it. Because in silence, the masks don't work. The characters you've created to navigate the world simply can't operate without mental noise to sustain themselves. And when they disappear, what's left? You are left. The real you. The you who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. The you who doesn't need to be anything other than what you already are. And that you knows how to heal everything that needs to be healed in your life. Not through more knowledge, not through more techniques, but through the very nature of unimpeded consciousness. That's what Eckhart Tolle discovered, and that's what he's trying to show you. That silence isn't absence, it's pure presence. And in that presence, everything that needs to be healed heals itself. Now you might be wondering, how do I do this in practice? How do I overcome this resistance that sometimes seems stronger than my will? The answer will surprise you. Because it's not about overcoming, it's about understanding. Eckhart Tolle tells a story that completely changed my perspective. He was sitting in a park, watching people pass by, and he noticed something extraordinary. Young children had a natural ability to simply be. They could sit and watch an ant for 15 minutes, completely absorbed, completely present, without hurry, without an agenda, without resistance to the moment. And then he realized, we haven't lost that capacity. We've just buried it under layers of mental conditioning. The silence that heals has always been available to you. You've just forgotten how to access it. It's as if you have a source of pure water in your backyard, but you spend your whole life looking for water elsewhere because you forgot it was there. But here's what nobody tells you about reconnecting with this natural capacity. You don't need to do anything heroic. You don't need week-long silent retreats. You don't need advanced meditation techniques. You just need 3 minutes and a simple understanding. The understanding is this: silence isn't something you do, it's something you allow. Imagine you're at a very noisy party, loud music, overlapping conversations, laughter, shouting. Suddenly, someone turns everything off, and for a moment, there's total silence. You didn't create that silence. It was always there underneath all the noise. You just allowed it to reveal itself. That's exactly how it works with your mind. Mental noise isn't natural, it's acquired. And silence is your original state. That's why children have such an easy time with it. They haven't yet learned to resist. So here's the first practical step. And it's so simple you might be tempted to dismiss it as useless. Don't dismiss it. For the next 3 days, try this. Once a day, sit in a chair for exactly 3 minutes. Don't close your eyes. Don't try to stop your thoughts. Don't force anything. Just observe what's happening around you. The sounds, the sensations, the thoughts that come and go, as if you were a scientist studying the present moment. And here's the crucial part. When your mind starts creating imaginary urgencies, when it starts bombarding you with things you should be doing, just note that as part of the experiment, interesting, there's my mind trying to get me out of here, as if you were observing an interesting animal in its natural habitat. Don't fight it, just observe, because something extraordinary will happen, maybe not on the first day, maybe not on the second, but it will happen. You'll begin to realize that there's a space between you and your thoughts, a space that's always been there, but that you've never noticed. And in that space, there's silence. Not the silence of the absence of sound, but the silence of pure presence, the silence that allows healing to occur. The silence of conscious presence. That's where healing happens. But let me tell you about the first time I truly experienced this. I was going through a really difficult period in my life. Constant anxiety, insomnia, the feeling that my mind was betraying me. I'd tried everything: therapy, medication, exercise, diets, breathing techniques. Nothing seemed to work, lastingly. Then, a friend lent me an Eckhart Tolle book, and it said something that seemed absurd at the time. Healing happens when you stop trying to heal. Damn, I thought, that's ridiculous. How am I going to get better if I don't do anything? But I was desperate, so I tried. One morning, instead of starting the day already planning how to solve my problems, I simply sat on the bed for 5 minutes. No agenda, just observing the light coming through the window. And for the first time in months, something calmed down. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a mystical revelation. It was more like relief. Like someone had turned down the volume on the mental chaos, and I realized something. In those 5 minutes, my problems hadn't disappeared, but my relationship with them had completely changed. Instead of being immersed in them, I was observing them from a safe distance. That's what silence does. It doesn't eliminate life's difficulties. It changes your perspective on them. It's like discovering you can watch the storm from inside a safe house instead of being lost in the middle of it. But here's something Eckhart Tolle observed about our modern culture. We treat the symptoms, but we ignore the root cause. The root cause of most mental suffering isn't external circumstances. It's the internal resistance to what's happening. And silence. Silence dissolves that resistance naturally, not through force, through understanding. When you are truly present, truly quiet, you begin to see that most of your suffering comes from stories your mind tells about what's happening, not from what's actually happening. It's the difference between being bitten by a dog and spending 3 hours thinking about being bitten by a dog. The first hurts, the second is unnecessary suffering. And silence teaches you the difference. But there's an obstacle almost everyone encounters when they start practicing this. And it's important that you know about it so you don't give up when it appears. The obstacle is this. Initially, silence can seem threatening, not physically, emotionally, as if you were approaching something dangerous. This is normal. It's even expected. Remember what we talked about, the ego being terrified of silence? Well, when you start approaching it deliberately, the ego goes into emergency mode. It will bombard you with urgent thoughts. It will create imaginary crises that need your immediate attention. It will convince you that you're wasting precious time. It's like someone pulled the fire alarm in your mind. But here's the secret. This is evidence that you're on the right track. The alarm isn't sounding because there's real danger. It's sounding because you're approaching something the ego considers a threat to its hegemony. So when that happens, and it will happen, just smile internally and continue. as if you were an explorer who finally found the treasure they were looking for, and the guardian of the treasure was making its last effort to scare you. But you know it's just theater. Because on the other side of that resistance, on the other side of that false alarm, is the most precious thing you can find in life. True peace, not the peace that depends on perfect circumstances, the peace that exists independently of what's happening around you. And when you find that peace, when you befriend the silence that contains it, everything in your life begins to organize itself differently. Your relationships become more authentic. Your work becomes more fluid. Your decisions become clearer. Not because you did something specific to improve these areas, but because you stopped interfering with the natural intelligence that has always been trying to express itself through you. It's as if you discovered you've been driving with the emergency brake on your whole life, and suddenly you release it. The difference is immediate, but perhaps the most profound transformation that happens when you become friends with silence is this. You stop being afraid to be alone with yourself. Think about it for a moment. How many of your daily activities are disguised ways of escaping your own company? Constant television, music always playing, endless conversations, compulsive work, social media. There's nothing wrong with these things in themselves. The problem is when you need them to feel good about yourself. When you discover the silence that heals, you discover something extraordinary. You discover that your own company is pleasant. Not because you've become a better person, but because you've stopped constantly judging who you are. In true silence, there is no judgment. There is only presence. And in that presence, you reconnect with a part of yourself that was never hurt, a part that was never inadequate, a part that always knew exactly who you are. Eckhart Tolle calls this the essential self. And this self has access to a wisdom that your thinking mind could never reach. It's the wisdom that knows when to speak and when to be quiet, that knows when to act and when to wait, that knows when to approach and when to withdraw. And that wisdom operates best in silence. But let me share with you the deepest insight Eckhart Tolle had about this, an insight that can change your life in seconds if you truly understand. He realized that the silence that heals isn't something you need to find. It's something you need to stop losing. You are constantly disconnecting from something that never went away. It's as if you had a treasure in your pocket, but you spend your whole life looking for it elsewhere. Silence, your natural peace, your inner wisdom. Have I always been there? You just forgot how to pay attention to them. And when you remember, when you finally stop running away and allow them to be what they always were, something inside you whispers, "Welcome back." Yes, as if you had been in exile from yourself, and finally you had found your way home. And that home is built of silence. Not the silence of absence, the silence of total presence, the silence that doesn't exclude anything, but embraces everything. The silence that doesn't shy away from life's challenges, but meets them with a completely new perspective. The silence that doesn't promise your life will be perfect, but promises you'll be able to navigate it with a grace you never knew you possessed. And maybe, just maybe, it's time you stopped running from it. Maybe it's time you discovered why the ego is so afraid of something so natural. Maybe it's time you experienced firsthand the healing power that's always been waiting in the silence you carry within. Because in the end, you don't need to be healed. You just need to stop resisting the healing that's already happening. And that healing happens in the silence the ego fears, but that your soul recognizes as home. Eckhart Tolle speaks to this profound truth, the stillness within. It's a place of power, a place of rest, a place where true understanding dawns. Imagine a vast starlit sky, unburdened by the clouds of thought. That's the silence we're talking about. It's not the absence of sound, but the presence of something far deeper, a profound connection to the universe, to yourself. It's a place where the noise of the world fades away and you're left with the gentle whisper of your own being. It's in this space, this sacred silence, that true transformation takes place. This is where you'll encounter your deepest truths, face your fears without judgment, and discover the profound peace that has always resided within you. It is within this silence, this sanctuary of the soul, that the true you emerges. A you that is not defined by the relentless chatter of the mind, but by the quiet, unwavering strength of the spirit. Eckhart Tolle reminds us that we need not seek outside of ourselves. The answers are already here, within the silence of our own being. Listen closely. Can you hear it? The gentle whisper of your soul, calling you home, to the silence, to yourself, to peace.